Have you ever stepped into a place that felt like it was doing more than simply existing around you? A place that seemed to notice you, measure you, and wait for you to make the wrong move? Imagine a quiet stretch of English countryside where the trees stand so still they seem to be listening, where the paths feel ordinary by day but wrong by dusk, and where the silence itself can begin to feel like a warning. In West Sussex, not far from the coastal town of Worthing, there is a patch of woodland that has acquired exactly that reputation. Locals call it Clapham Wood. Outsiders sometimes dismiss it as another rural ghost story, but over the years, the name has become attached to a long and deeply unsettling pattern of deaths, disappearances, animal tragedies, strange lights, occult whispers, and experiences so disturbing that even people who do not believe in the paranormal have struggled to explain them away. What makes Clapham Wood so enduring is not simply that people tell stories about it. What makes this place different is the way the stories cling to real events, the way rumor wraps itself around documented loss, and the way each unexplained case seems to deepen the sense that something has been wrong there for a very long time. If this were only one sighting, one missing person, or one local superstition, perhaps the legend would have died out years ago. Instead, the mystery kept feeding itself. A body is found where search teams insist they already looked. A corpse decays far too quickly. Animals vanish into a relatively small wood and are never seen again. Witnesses describe shrieks in the darkness, crushing headaches, sudden nausea, shadowy figures, and lights moving over the trees. At some point, coincidence stops feeling like a satisfying answer. The village of Clapham itself does not look like the sort of place where such a reputation should grow. It sits in a part of Sussex that at first glance seems almost too peaceful to carry any lasting horror. Rolling green countryside, hedgerows, old lanes, and a landscape shaped more by history than by modern urgency. But just beyond that calm lies a darker geography. Much of the mystery centers on the woodland near Chanctonbury Ring, an ancient hilltop enclosure whose roots reach back to the Iron Age. That alone would be enough to give the area an older atmosphere. They make people feel that what is buried beneath them may not be entirely dead. Yet at Clapham Wood, the legends do not seem to have been layered onto a blank space. They appear to have grown from a long series of events that left real fear behind. One of the cases most often linked to the curse of Clapham Wood begins in 1972 with the disappearance of police constable Peter Goldsmith. Goldsmith was not an inexperienced drifter or a reckless thrill seeker. He was a former soldier and a police officer, someone familiar with routine, terrain, and discipline. On June 6th, after finishing work, he changed into running clothes and set off home. It was not some dramatic journey into remote wilderness. It was a route he knew. And yet, he never reached his front door. What followed was not a half-hearted local search, but a serious operation involving officers, tracker dogs, and extensive sweeps of the surrounding area. The implication was clear. If Goldsmith was out there, they should have found him. They did not. Days passed, then weeks, and still nothing emerged. No clear trail, no obvious evidence, no simple explanation. Then, 6 months later, his remains were found beside a path leading out of Clapham Wood. But what truly gave the case its lasting power was the claim that this area had already been searched, and searched thoroughly. People involved reportedly insisted that the body could not have been there during the original sweeps. If that was true, it suggested one of two possibilities. Either search teams somehow missed what should have been found, or the body was placed there later. Neither answer was comforting, and because decomposition had gone too far for a clear cause of death to be established, the case did not close with understanding. It closed with emptiness. That pattern would become horribly familiar. 3 years later, in 1975, Another disappearance fed the growing dread around the woods. Leon Foster, a local pensioner, went out for one of his routine walks and failed to return. The community already knew what had happened to Goldsmith, and that earlier case cast a shadow over the search almost immediately. Yet what should have brought quicker answers instead deepened the mystery. The pathologist examining the remains was reportedly struck by the state of decomposition. According to the descriptions that later circulated, the body appeared to have decayed far more than would normally be expected in such a short period. That phrase appears again and again in retellings of Clapham Wood. Advanced decomposition, beyond expectation, difficult to account for. Over time, it stopped sounding like a medical observation and began to sound like a signature. Then, in 1981, the unease became darker still. A woman named Jill Matthews, described as a mental health patient, disappeared into the woods and was later found dead. Once again, reports surrounding the condition of the body became part of the legend. Once again, decomposition was described as severe, disproportionate, and difficult to explain. By itself, that kind of detail might be taken cautiously. Bodies decay under many conditions, and memory can exaggerate. But in the lore of Clapham Wood, repetition is everything. The more often the same strange element appears, the more it starts to feel like a pattern rather than a coincidence. Some would later claim that the woods seemed to consume the dead too quickly, as if evidence itself could not survive there. That interpretation belongs to legend, not science. But once a place acquires a reputation like this, medical uncertainty easily becomes supernatural fuel. Another name tied to the site is Reverend Harry Snelling, a retired clergyman who disappeared after going for a walk and whose remains were eventually recovered years later. One of the stranger details associated with this case is the story that a Canadian tourist contacted authorities after claiming to have seen a body in the woods and provided directions that led to the discovery. Even without adding anything paranormal, the image is already unsettling. A retired clergyman vanishes, search efforts fail, time passes, and then a distant stranger appears with the clue that changes everything. Yet what gave the story real staying power was, again, the location. The remains were said to have been found in an area that had previously been searched. For locals, it echoed Goldsmith. A body missed, or moved, or hidden until the right moment. The same question kept returning like a knock at the door. How can the dead appear in places already checked? That question is part of the reason Clapham Wood became more than a site of sad, unexplained deaths. It became a place people described as deceptive. A place that did not merely contain danger, but seemed to distort search, sight, memory, and certainty. Whether that impression came from grief, rumor, incompetence, or something stranger, it became central to the myth. Once a landscape gains the reputation of hiding things badly enough to be found, and yet well enough to evade professionals, the human imagination begins to do the rest. Then came the animals. For many locals, the stories about lost or damaged pets are among the most disturbing parts of the Clapham Wood legend, because they feel intimate in a way that even human mystery sometimes does not. A person vanishing into a sinister place is terrifying, but there is still a gap between the witness and the victim. A beloved dog slipping its lead for a few moments and returning blind, broken, or not at all. That feels closer, more immediate, more personal. Stories spread in the mid-1970s that dogs had entered the wood and either vanished completely or emerged in shocking condition. One of the most repeated accounts concerns a dog later found paralyzed and blind after disappearing only briefly. Whether every retelling preserves the facts exactly is difficult to know. The story survives because of what it represents. Not only that the woods were dangerous, but that something in them could reach out fast violently and without warning. As these stories spread, the explanations grew darker. Some people blamed natural hazards. Some suggested hidden pits, barbed wire, disease, or poisoned bait. But others moved quickly into occult territory. One of the most influential voices connected to the area was local historian and researcher Charles Walker, who argued that the woods were linked to devil worship and ritual sacrifice. Walker claimed to have uncovered evidence of underground activity and secret gatherings. In some versions of the story, he even said he had spoken to someone connected to a local cult. The details are difficult to separate from myth now, but the impact of the allegation was enormous. Once the public imagination accepted the possibility that animals were not merely going missing, but were being taken and used in ritual acts, the woods stopped being only a place of tragedy and became a stage for deliberate evil. The cult element is one of the most powerful parts of the Clapham Wood legend, because it offers something people often find easier to fear than abstract supernatural force: human intent. It is one thing to imagine a cursed landscape. It is another to imagine that hidden within it are people who understand the darkness better than outsiders do and feed it on purpose. According to the stories that spread through local lore, the sacrifices were made to Hecate, the ancient goddess associated with witchcraft, crossroads, the night, and the underworld. Whether this connection has any firm historical foundation is much less important in mythic terms than the fact that it sounds ancient. It gives the horror a lineage. And at Clapham, lineage matters. The area around Chanctonbury Ring had long carried whispers of ritual use and supernatural significance. The ring itself, as an ancient site, already possessed the sort of atmosphere that attracts legends even before modern tragedy enters the picture. Old earthworks, Roman traces, a hilltop with commanding views and too much history. From there, it is not difficult to understand how local imagination could travel from archaeology to occult continuity. From shrines to ceremonies, from ceremonies to secret worship. Some stories go further still, reaching back to medieval curses and older acts of vengeance. One recurring legend involves a local landowner invoking Hecate after a dispute with a priest, supposedly placing a curse on the parish and its people. Whether that tale can be historically defended is almost beside the point. In the mythology of Clapham Wood, it functions as an origin story, a way of explaining why the land feels contaminated before any modern case even begins. And this is where the legend becomes especially strong. It doesn't claim the evil began recently. It claims the danger was always there. According to that view, the disappearances, the rapid decomposition, the animal tragedies, the sightings, and the unexplained illnesses are not separate episodes. They are manifestations of one long hostility rooted in the land itself. Some say the hill fort was never spiritually clean. Others say whatever began as pagan ritual evolved into darker, secret practices that survived the passing centuries in hidden form. Still others believe the place attracts human darkness rather than generating it, pulling disturbed people, occultists, and seekers toward itself like a wound drawing flies. In each version, the result is the same. Clapham Wood is not portrayed as unlucky. It is portrayed as hungry. Reports from people who stayed near Chanctonbury Ring at night only deepened that reputation. One account often repeated describes a group camping in the 1960s who were woken in the early hours by eerie howling from the tree line. They reportedly saw a dark figure pacing or moving strangely at the edge of visibility, sometimes retreating, sometimes screaming as if in pain. As the men tried to approach, sudden physical symptoms hit the group. Sharp pain, severe headaches, vomiting, and an overpowering sense that something in the area had turned hostile. Whether this can be explained by fear, suggestion, alcohol, environmental causes, or something more unusual, the story has all the elements needed for survival in folklore. It combines physical suffering with a barely seen entity. It offers witnesses rather than a lone observer. It includes a boundary that should not have been crossed. And above all, it leaves the feeling that the place reacts when disturbed. Later, writers added more encounters of the same kind. One account describes a person sleeping out near the ring and hearing a shrill cry that seemed at first like a bird, only to realize it sounded horribly human. Then came the impression of a dark form moving through the sky, splitting, screaming, rejoining, and vanishing. These kinds of experiences are impossible to verify in any hard sense, yet they matter enormously in the life of a legend. They transform the woods from a place where bad things happened into a place where bad things can still happen to anyone who enters at the wrong time. That is the difference between history and active myth. History belongs to the past. Active myth waits for the next witness. Then there are the lights. No Clapham Wood narrative remains purely terrestrial for long. At some point, the stories tend to widen upward into the sky. Witnesses over the years described strange aerial phenomena. Black, silent shapes, hovering discs, glowing objects, smaller lights breaking away from larger ones, strobing beams directed into the woods, and massive dark forms lurking in cloud cover. Whether these incidents belong to ufology, misidentification, or embellished memory, their presence in the Clapham story is revealing. It shows that the location resists being limited to one explanation. Some haunted places are strictly ghost stories. Some are occult stories. Some are UFO stories. Clapham Wood absorbs all three and makes them feel strangely compatible. That blending gives the legend much of its power. If the wood were only associated with cult rumors, skeptics could dismiss it as moral panic. If it were only associated with unexplained deaths, people could file it under tragic coincidence. If it were only known for lights in the sky, others could call it a UFO hotspot and move on. But when deaths, decomposition, occult whispers, shadow figures, sickness, animal mutilation claims, and aerial anomalies all gather in one place, the human mind begins to search for a single underlying cause. That search is where myths thrive. Some believe an ancient curse sits at the center. Some imagine an opening between worlds. Some blame ritual activity. Some see a place where spiritual, psychological, and physical disturbances overlap. Clapham Wood survives precisely because it offers no final answer while encouraging endless ones. And yet, despite all the speculation, the emotional core of the story remains very simple. Searchers found too little too late. Witnesses came away shaken. The place itself acquired a feeling that does not wash off easily. That is the part of the story that matters most, because even when every supernatural claim is stripped away, a residue of unease remains. If you take away the curse, you are still left with a landscape connected to unresolved death. If you take away the cult theory, you are still left with cases that disturbed investigators and frightened locals. If you take away the UFO sightings, you are still left with a reputation built over decades, not days. Rational explanations may exist for each part in isolation, but Clapham Wood has never lived in isolation. It lives in accumulation. That may also explain why it feels older than some modern mystery sites. Clapham Wood does not sound like a laboratory accident or a government cover-up. Its darkness feels more primitive, more ceremonial, more rooted in soil, weather, age, and repetition. Even the modern incidents seem to fall into the shadow of something older. The deaths do not merely happen near an ancient site. In the imagination of believers, they reactivate it. The animal disappearances do not merely echo panic, they feel like offerings. The screams in the dark do not merely frighten. They sound like pain tied to a place that has been hurting for centuries. Whether one believes any of that literally is almost secondary. The symbolism is too strong to ignore. There is also a social reason the legend endured. Places like Clapham Wood allow modern anxieties to hide inside ancient frames. Fear of violence, fear of mental instability, fear of ritual abuse, fear of being lost. Fear of a body not being found, fear of authorities failing, fear of nature being secretly hostile, fear that civilization is thinner than it looks. All of these can fit comfortably inside the idea of a cursed wood. That is why the stories remain compelling, even to people who do not believe in curses. So, what is Clapham Wood really? A cursed site. A magnet for troubled people. A place whose reputation grew through coincidence and retelling, until every death in its orbit became part of the same myth. An old landscape whose history, atmosphere, and tragedies fused into something that now functions like a modern folk nightmare. Perhaps it is all of those at once. Perhaps that is the only reason it still matters. The story of Clapham Wood is not powerful because every claim is proven. It is powerful because so many claims remain difficult to bury. They keep resurfacing, just like the bodies said to have appeared, where they should have been found before. And that is the most unsettling possibility of all. Not that there is a single clean explanation hiding behind the woods, waiting to be discovered, but that Clapham Wood may be one of those rare places where explanation itself begins to fail. A place where facts exist, but never enough of them. A place where each answer arrives too late, damaged, partial, or contaminated by fear. A place where rumor does not replace reality. So much as grow out of it, twisting around it until the two can no longer be fully separated. That is why people still talk about the curse of Clapham Wood. Because whether the evil there is ancient, human, psychological, environmental, or something no one has named correctly yet, the result feels the same. The woods keep their secrets. And for decades, those secrets have seemed to come at a price.